I want you to imagine a young lad in Cork City, back around maybe 1920 or 1930, 8 or 9 year old, and he's about to make his first confession. Think back to your first confession. Certainly if you were of my vintage in Ireland, you'd have darn good reason to remember it. Because we had to go through, it was, I tell you now, it was something else. I'm going to let the young fella speak himself. We have the book here in case we get stuck. All the trouble began when my grandfather died, and my grandmother, my father's mother, came to live with us. Relations in the one house are a strain at the best of times, but to make matters worse, my grandmother was a real old country woman, and quite unsuited to life in the town. She had a fat, wrinkled old face, and to mother's great indignation, she went around the house in bare feet. The boots had her crippled, she said. For dinner she had a jug of Guinness and a pot of potatoes. And she poured out the potatoes on the table and ate them slowly with great relish, using her fingers by way of a fork. Now girls are supposed to be fastidious, but I was the one who suffered most from this. Nora, my sister, just sucked up to the old woman for the penny she got every Friday out of the old age pension. A thing I couldn't do, I was too honest. That was my problem. And when I was playing with Bill Connell, the Sergeant Major's son, and saw my grandmother steering up the path with a jug of Guinness sticking out from beneath her shawl, I was mortified. I made excuses not to let my friend come into the house to play with me, for I could never be sure of what that old woman would be up to if he came in. When mother went out to work and my grandmother made the dinner, I wouldn't touch it. Nora once tried to make me, but I hid under the kitchen table and took the bread knife with me for protection. Nora had on to be very indignant. She wasn't, of course, but she knew mother saw through her, so she sided with Gran. She came after me. I lashed out at her with the bread knife, and after that she left me alone. I stayed there till mother came in from work and made my dinner. But later, when father came in, Nora said to him in a shocked voice, "Oh, Della, do you know what Jackie did at dinner time?" Then of course it all came out. Father gave me a flaking. Mother interfered, and for days after, he never spoke to me. Mother only barely spoke to Nora, all on account of that old woman. God knows I was heart scalded by her. Then to crown my misfortunes, I had to make my first confession and communion. It was an old woman called Ryan who prepared us for this. She was about the same age as Grant. She was well-to-do, lived in a big house in Montenotte, wore a black cloak and bonnet, and came to school every day at 3 o'clock when we should have been going home, and spoke to us about hell. Now, she may have mentioned the other place as well, but that could only have been by accident. For hell had the first place in her heart. She lit a candle, took out a new half-crown from her handbag, and offered it to the first boy who would hold one finger, just one finger, in a tiny flame for 5 minutes by the school clock. Being always very ambitious, I was dying to volunteer, but I thought it might seem greedy. Then she asked us, were we afraid to hold one finger, just one finger in a tiny flame, and not afraid of burning all over in roasting hot furnaces for all eternity? All eternity, just think of that. A whole lifetime goes by. Has there even a drop in the ocean of your suffering? Gee, the woman was really interesting about hell. But my attention was all fixed on the half-crown. When she was finished, she put it back in her handbag. It was a great disappointment to me. A religious woman like that, you'd think she wouldn't bother about a little thing like a half-crown. Another day she told us about a priest she knew, who woke one night to see a fellow he didn't recognize leaning over the edge of the bed. He was a bit surprised, naturally enough, and he asked the fellow what he wanted, and the fellow said that he wanted to go to confession. The priest said it was a sort of an awkward time and wouldn't it do in the morning? But the fellow said no. The last time he went, there was one sin he held back, being afraid to mention it, and now it was always on his mind. The priest knew then that this was a bad case. He got up to get dressed, and just then the rooster crowed in the yard outside, and when the priest turned around, there was no trace of the fellow, only the smell of burning timber. And when he looked down, he saw the print of 2 hands burnt on the bedclothes. Gee, that story made a shocking impression on me. But the worst of all was when she taught us how to examine our conscience. Did we take the name of the Lord our God in vain? Did we honour our fathers and our mothers? I asked her if that included grandmothers, and she said it did. Did we love our neighbours as ourselves? Did we covet our neighbours' goods? And I remember the way I felt about the penny that Nora got every Friday out of the old age pension. I decided between one thing and another, I had broken the whole 10 of the commandments, all on account of that old woman. And so long as she remained in the house, I had no hope of ever doing anything else. I was scared to death of confession. The day the others went, my mother wasn't there, so she sent Nora with me instead. Now that girl had ways of tormenting me that mother never dreamt of. She held my hand as we went down to the chapel, smiling sadly all the while, as if she were taking me to hospital for an operation. Oh, God help us, Jackie. Isn't it terrible? But you weren't a good boy. Jackie, my heart bleeds for you. Don't forget to tell him about the time you kicked Gran in the shin. Really, boys. I don't want to go to confession at all. But sure, you'll have to go to confession. If you don't, the priest might be up to the house looking for you. It doesn't know that I'm not sorry for you. Do you remember the time you went for me with the bread knife under the kitchen table? And the language you used. I don't know what he'd do with you at all. He might have just sent you to the bishop. I remember thinking bitterly to myself that if she only knew the half of what I had to tell, if I told it. I knew now there was no hope, and I understood perfectly well why the fellow in Mrs. Ryan's story had made a bad confession. I remember the long steep hill down to the chapel, and the sunlit hillsides beyond the valley of the river, which I saw in gaps between the houses like Adam's last glimpse of paradise. Then when she had manoeuvred me all the way down the steps into the chapel yard, Nora suddenly changed her tone. She became the raging, malicious devil she really was. There you are, says she with a yelp of triumph, hurling me through the church door, and I hope he gives you the penitential psalms, you dirty little calf. I knew that I was lost, given up to eternal justice. The door with the coloured glass panels swung closed behind me, the sunlight went out and gave place to deep shadow, and the wind whistled outside so that the silence within seemed to crackle like ice beneath my feet. Nora sat in front of me by the confessional. There were a couple of old women ahead of her. And then a miserable-looking old wretch came and wedged me in at the other end of the seat, so that I couldn't escape even if I had the courage to. He joined his hands, bowed his head, and then raised his eyes in the direction of the ceiling, muttering aspirations in anguished tones. And I wondered to myself if he had a grandmother too. Only a grandmother could account for a fellow behaving in such a heartbroken way, but he was better off than I was, for he would go in, confess his sin, get absolution and come out. While I would go in, hold back a sin, and then die in the night, and be continually coming back, burning people's furniture. Nora's turn came and she went into the box, and I heard the sound of a slide being pulled across, and then her voice, as if butter would melt in her mouth. Another slide, and out she came. Oh God, the hypocrisy of women. She bowed her head, joined her hands away low down in her stomach, and walked all the way up the centre aisle to the side altar, looking like a saint. You never saw such an exhibition of devotion. And I remember the devilish malice which would she pay me from our house to the chapel yard. And I wondered if all religious people were like that, really. Then my turn came. I went in, and the door of the confessional closed of itself behind me. It was pitch dark inside, and I couldn't see a priest or anything else. In the darkness was the matter between God and me, and he had all the odds. Everything that I'd ever learned about confession got mixed up in my mind, so that I knelt to one wall and said, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. This is my first confession." I waited for a minute or two, but nothing happened, so I tried it on the other wall. Nothing happened there either. He had me spotted all right. Now, it was just at that moment that I noticed a little ledge about one height with my head. Now, it was really a place where grown-up people rested their elbows on, but In my distracted state, I thought it was the place you were supposed to kneel. Now, of course, it was a bit on the high side and not very deep, but I was always good at climbing, and I managed to get up all right. But you see, staying up was the problem. There was no place you could get a grip on, except a little bit of wooden moulding. So I took a firm grip of the moulding and repeated the words a little louder. And this time something happened all right. A slide was pulled across, a little light entered the box, and a man's voice said, "Who's there?" "'Tis me, Father," I said, for fear he mightn't see me and go away again. Now the light was coming from some place about one level with my knees. So I took a firm grip of the moulding and swung myself down, only to see the astonished face of an old priest looking up at me. He had to put his head to one side to see me, and I had to put my head to one side to see him, so that we were more or less looking at each other upside down. It struck me as being a comical way of hearing confessions, but I didn't feel it my place to criticise. As my father Fry said, "This is my first confession," I rattled off all in one breath and swung myself down the least shade to make it easier for him. "What are you doing up there?" said the priest in an angry voice. And the strain that the politeness put on my grip of the moulding, together with the shock of being addressed in such an uncivil manner, was too much for me. I lost my grip, tumbled, hit the door in a merciful wallop, and landed in the flat of my back out in the aisle. All the old women who were waiting for confession stood up with their mouths open. The priest came out the middle door of the confessional. He pushed the biretta back in his forehead. He looked something desperate. And then Nora comes scampering down the aisle. Oh, she said, I have known you do it. I can't let you out of my sight for 1 minute, you dirty little kaffir. And then before I had time to get up to defend myself, she bent down over me and gave me a clip across the ear. This reminded me that I was so stunned that I'd forgotten to cry, so that people might think I wasn't hurt at all, when in fact I was probably maimed for life. I let her roar out of me. "What's all this about?" said the priest, pulling Nora off me. "How dare you hit the child, you little vixen?" I can't do my penance by him, for it. "Well, you go and do it, or I'll give you some more to do. Off with you." "Was it coming to confession you were, my poor man?" "'Twas, Father," says I with a sob. "Oh," he says, "a big hefty fellow like you must have terrible sins to confess. Is this your first?" "'Tis, Father." "Worse and worse," he said gloomily. "The crimes of a lifetime. I don't know will I be able to deal with you at all today. I'll have to first deal with those old women who are over there waiting for confession. Although you can see by the looks of them they haven't much to tell." The relief of this was really enormous. Nora stuck out her tongue at me behind the priest's back, but I couldn't even be bothered retorting. I knew from the moment that man opened his mouth that he was intelligent above the ordinary. And when I had time to think, I saw how right I was. It stood to reason that a fellow confessing after 7 years would have more to tell than somebody who went every week. The crimes of a lifetime, exactly as he said. It was only what he expected. And all the rest was only the cackle of old women and girls with their talk of hell, the bishop and the penitential psalms. I started on my examination of conscience. And barring the one bad business about my grandmother, my story didn't sound so bad at all. Now, the next time, the priest steered me into the confession. And when he had me settled, he got into his own box and sat down, drew back the slide. "Well, now, what do they call you?"
Due to the limitations of YouTube, I had to add part 2 next, so watch that after this.